McDonald's, the logo of America, with over 40,000 restaurants around the globe. It is the most recognizable brand probably ever. It brings people together, kids and grandparents, rich and poor, fat and skinny, mostly fat but some skinny, and somehow throw YouTuber in that mix, and now I'm here. And I am going to talk about McDonald Land and the many commercials, mascots, movies, controversies, crimes, toys, and so much more, all revolving around how a magical place inhabited by a clown and burger people degrades down to a simple box that lives in a void, resulting in a deep and complex lore of McDonald's. But first, today I am at McDonald's working the fries. I thought I would be the first president to do this, but apparently I'm not. And Grimace is here with me too, just kinda staring at me. That doesn't matter. I'm not gonna waste any more time. Let's talk about this wonderful business. We all know McDonald's. It's been a part of American culture since the 40s and 50s. We've all had it. I'm not going to talk about the boring real-life story of the chain and how it became successful. You probably know all of that. Instead, I am talking about the in-universe timeline and events of McDonald Land. Beginning in the 60s with Speedy, slightly before McDonald Land. Never seen this guy? Yeah, I don't blame you. He hasn't been used in almost 60 years, even predating the Golden Arches. Speedy was never in a commercial, only on signs outside the restaurants. He was a chef with a burger head, sort of a predecessor to Mayor McCheese. He didn't do all that much, except for wink, and that's about it. He was very quickly replaced by a certain clown. This is the very first iteration of Ronald McDonald, before McDonald Land even existed. I don't know why they went with a clown. I guess at the time they still weren't seen as evil creatures. I don't know. It was a different time. The first Ronald looked much different than what we have today. He wore a food tray on his head and a cup on his nose. He had a tray, sort of belt thing, that would magically create a hamburger, and when you remove it, it would create another one instantaneously. Modern day Ronald is creepy, but this cup-nosed guy is somehow even worse. I don't think he went to McDonald's for the burgers. I think he was there for the kids. Thankfully, this version does not last. Assuming Ronald McDonald is the same person throughout the lifespan of McDonald's, he just gets an outfit change. However, it's always possible there are multiple different Ronalds in the McDonald Land universe. One of the first 60s commercials advertised the debut of the Filet-O-Fish sandwich, and it was animated. There's a fisherman character. I don't know who that is. I've never seen this character before in my life. Ignore him. He never shows up again. Side note, the slogan for the sandwich was "the fish that catches people," and the visual image of that is horrifying. Also introduced in the 60s is Ronald's vehicle. It's a flying hamburger. That's what the commercials called it, but I mean, I don't want to be that guy, but it's more of a flying plate with a giant hamburger on it, but let's not split hairs here. In one of these flying hamburger commercials, it suggests Ronald is a mystical being, able to just materialize food in his hand. The flying hamburger, however, would not make it into the 70s. This part isn't about the lore, but looking back on some of these commercials, it's crazy to see some of the food they sold. Roast beef on a roll, home fried chicken. Look at this. They even separated the light meat from the dark meat. Hey, they didn't just do that with chicken in the 60s. Another pivotal commercial in the 60s was the fun food commercial where the burgers, fries, and shakes are sentient. They appear as normal food, but they bounce and laugh, which makes this commercial a bellwether of what the 1970s commercials will be. The 1970s is where McDonald's became McDonald's. With the exception of Ronald, pretty much every mascot we know originated in this decade. McDonald's shifted all their focus to advertising to kids, and thus McDonald Land was created. The 1970s McDonald Land is a magical place filled with food. That's about it, honestly. Most parts of McDonald Land contribute to some food item on the McDonald's menu. The trees are sentient, which isn't unsettling at all, but the trees grow apple pies. There is a Filet-O-Fish lake where you can fish for Filet-O-Fish sandwiches. There's a hamburger patch with sentient hamburgers, and it's not like the ones from the 60s. These burgers have eyes. And to go along with the hamburger patch, there's a French fry patch, but that's a little less alive. Even the trash bins are alive, and they beg you to feed them wrappers. They even give a little song and dance. Guys, just throw away your stuff. It gives them great pleasure to feel themselves getting fuller. The point is, I think these commercials are insinuating that McDonald Land produces the food served at McDonald's. I don't have too many problems with that, but the Filet-O-Fish, that's kinda nasty. If you fish for them, that implies the sandwiches are alive and swimming in the lake, which also implies the Filet-O-Fish is its own separate species, its own type of fish, and the bun is a part of the living creature. I think I'm focusing on the wrong thing here. Instead, let's look at our cast of characters. Grimace, the iconic purple whatever he is. Some say he's a taste bud. Some say he's the embodiment of a milkshake. Some say he's just a blob. It doesn't actually matter at all, but McDonald's did kind of say he's the embodiment of a milkshake, and I prefer that because a walking taste bud is disgusting to me. When Grimace was first introduced, he was known as Evil Grimace and stole all of the cups, but mostly milkshakes. Evil Grimace had 4 arms to commit his crimes with, but that didn't last. Eventually, Grimace turned good. I don't know how, but I assume Ronald's good nature influenced him. Or it's a possibility that Ronald mutilated Grimace one day as punishment for all of his thievery. He cut off his 2 lower arms and Grimace hasn't acted up since. I don't know. Either way, they're best friends now, and they have been for decades. After his redemption, he became the stereotypical dumb, lovable oaf character, except Grimace became, like, really dumb. The Hamburglar, the original criminal in McDonald Land. He was first known as the Lone Jogger, for some odd reason, but that very quickly ended and he got the name of the Hamburglar, because he burglars hamburgers. Like most of the cast, he had a very weird original look. His first face sorta looks like a cross between a witch mixed with a ball of clay that was run over by a car. For most of the 70s, he spoke almost complete gibberish, sounding like a high-pitched Crazy Dave, except for his catchphrase, "Robble, robble."
Rebel, rebel, rebel.
In the last half of the decade, I'm pretty sure his head was changed around a little bit, but it was still ugly as ever. Nearing the end of this decade, his villainy definitely declined, albeit he was still mischievous. Someone was definitely laying down the law. Speaking of, Officer Mac, or originally just Big Mac, is a hamburger head human thing. I don't know, man. He was responsible for capturing the villains of McDonald Land, which there was a lot of. The food's just too good not to steal. Besides being a cop, he actually didn't do very much at all. Mayor McCheese, Officer Mac's counterpart. Mayor McCheese is the mayor of McDonald Land. It's unclear how many terms he has served, but I feel pretty certain he's corrupt, and Officer Mac probably has something to do with it. Most of the characters in McDonald Land represent a food, and Mayor McCheese, along with Officer Mac, represent the burgers, which in McDonald Land come from the Burger Patch, which are alive. There are many instances of them being sentient, and Mayor McCheese and Officer Mac encourage kids and parents alike to eat them up. So, anybody seeing a problem with that? They are campaigning for the death of their species. Also, if the burgers grow in a patch, are Mayor McCheese and Officer Mac fully grown plants? I think Mayor McCheese wants the other burgers eaten, so there is no competition for the elections. Luckily, we do get to see an election in McDonald Land, and it only further proves Mayor McCheese needs to be impeached for his corruption. When his position as mayor is challenged, he promises to give away free stuff to his voters and the people of McDonald Land if re-elected. I don't know if that's bribing, lobbying, electoral clientelism, or something else, but McCheese needs to be indicted. But he hasn't, of course, because Officer Mac isn't gonna do that to his buddy. Officer Mac will lose his cut of power too. Apparently, Officer Mac doesn't bother with white-collar crime, but I did see him chasing down Grimace for being a little too purple. Suffice to say, after that election, Mayor McCheese was re-elected, and we're in for another 4 corrupt years. Speaking of crooks, this is Captain Crook, and he is a pirate, and also another criminal. He steals the Filet-O-Fish sandwiches, subsequently becoming the mascot for that item. His original design was also pretty unsettling, like the Hamburglar, but eventually he gets some plastic surgery or something and becomes a little less scary. Just like the other villains, he too was hit with Ronald's magic and was redeemed. The last villains, the Gobelins, these guys are all relatively creepy. They're the original Fry Kids, which you're probably more familiar with. These Gobelins would feast on fries. Just like everyone else, they were tamed down a bit in the last half of this decade, although their cravings never stopped. Ronald and gang just sort of accepted them as fry fiends. The last major character, and most likely the most forgotten, is the Professor. He had many different design tweaks and slight changes throughout the decade, but always remained a good ally to Ronald. The Professor is responsible for creating some of the stuff in McDonald Land. a little unclear of what, but he makes a lot of machines. Could all of McDonald Land be a result of the professor's experiments? Sure, but that is such an overused theory trope that I don't care to get into it. An example of one of his machines is his cookie creator. It was a little conveyor belt that produced cookies that were made into the shape of the characters. I'm assuming they were like animal crackers, but with Ronald and gang on them. Usually his machines have some sort of flaw, but in this commercial in particular, it's upside down, so not a huge flaw. But the weirdest thing in this commercial though is that Grimace can just float upside down because he feels like it, or he's incredibly dumb. As for the content of these commercials, it's really just getting to know the characters. They're all there to promote the various menu items, and that's exactly what they do. Most of the time, it's Ronald riding on his train that runs all the way through McDonald Land, and the train is entirely too small for him. Or the commercials show Officer Mac enforcing the law on the many recidivists. At the very end of the decade, the Happy Meal is introduced, one of the most nostalgic things for any age group, responsible for creating thousands of toys and many crippling collecting addictions, and a contributor to the childhood obesity crisis that we now suffer from today. McDonald's got way too much of the blame for that, though. Hey, you don't happen to notice Burger King and Wendy's right down the road, do you? Anyway, the Happy Meal was introduced, the meal for kids, and with that came the Happy Meal gang, a sentient burger, which is nothing new, sentient fries, which is really more of a sentient bag with fries in it, but let's not muddy the waters, and a sentient cup. They would basically just tell the kids to stuff their faces with this food. This adds a whole new layer to those sentient waste bins, though. Have all of the wrappers always been sentient, or is it just specifically these ones? If all of the wrappers have been sentient, the waste bins have been eating fellow alive creatures. You know what, I'm looking way too hard into it. Just a little bit after their creation, a new member was added, and that was Cookies. It was the wrapper again, not the cookies, so The final character of this decade is one of Grimace's relatives, Uncle O'Grimacy. He came to McDonald Land to advertise the Shamrock Shake, the seasonal mint-flavored shake. He never really did that much, but he's a green Grimace. After the very few commercials he was in, he was phased out and never returned. I guess he wasn't all that lucky. A little tangent here, not super important to the timeline and in-universe lore of McDonald's, but it's worth mentioning the play places. Further cementing these characters into our culture, playgrounds were made based on their likeness. There were statues of Ronald and a few of the other characters. There was a Grimace cage thing, an Officer Mac prison cell, Hamburglar swings, Happy Meal squad, and Goblin, whatever these things are. I just know they're on a spring, and they can easily hurt someone. A Captain Crook slide, Mayor McCheese merry-go-round, the creepy trees. You get the point. Play places will come up again, so I figured it was best to mention them now. Before I move into the 80s decade, it's worth noting the H.R. Pufnstuf lawsuit. It's a rather famous story, so I'll just give a quick rundown. There was a kids show called H.R. Pufnstuf. It was very similar to McDonald Land, suspiciously similar, because Pufnstuf did it first. McDonald's advertising were actually going to hire the Pufnstuf creators to work on McDonald Land before it existed. But at the last moment, McDonald's yanked out the deal and just plagiarized their stuff. The biggest similarity was H.R. Pufnstuf himself and Mayor McCheese. So anywho, the creators of H.R. Pufnstuf sued and McDonald's lost, resulting in the retirement of the character. Oops, spoiler. They managed to keep Mayor McCheese halfway into the 80s, but then they booted him. Anyway, the 1980s. Straight into the decade, we're introduced to our newest and one of the most iconic characters, Birdie the Early Bird, here to advertise for breakfast at McDonald's. Grimace gets milkshakes, Captain Crook gets the Filet-O-Fish, Birdie gets an entire meal. Birdie very quickly became one of the main recurring cast. She is usually joining the gang on whatever adventure, learning to fly, all that bird stuff. However, when she first appeared, she too had a nightmarish appearance like Captain Crook. With the introduction of Happy Meal toys a few years prior, I'd say about half of the commercials were now about advertising for that month's toy. Ronald and gang were still included, but now the commercial centered on whatever toy it was. It was the beginning of the McDonald's and Disney relationship, something that would lead to so many iconic toy sets. When the commercials aren't about the toys, they're pretty similar to the 70s commercials in that the storylines usually feature food that has gone missing and Ronald has to go get it, or something along those lines. They went on a handful of wackier adventures too, time traveling and finding a prehistoric Hamburglar, and going to space. In 1983, the professor would come up with his greatest invention yet, the Chicken McNugget. I don't know if it was the wisest thing for the advertising team to insinuate the McNuggets came from a lab, but to each their own. The professor created them, and ever since, they completely inundate the commercials. A set of McNuggets, called the McNugget Buddies, was added to the Happy Meal gang, but they also got many commercials all to themselves. There was a lot of focus on them, but hey, McDonald's struck gold, and I don't blame them for advertising. The goblins were no longer goblins, and were turned into Fry Guys, but that didn't last long after a female was introduced, making them Fry Kids. Now we're into 1985. The characters got mainstreamed. Pretty much every character got a redesign. Everything got very colorful and saturated. Ronald and Grimace got slight design tweaks, but nothing major. Hamburglar got a redesign, and it's the design we're all familiar with. Birdie got an upgrade, looking much less like a soulless demon. Captain Crook got a redesign. Oh, by the way, Captain Crook has been fully reformed and just goes by the Captain now. The Professor changed design. The waste bins also changed design. This one's quite drastic, but also not important at all. Oh, wait a second. Officer Mac and Mayor McCheese. Well, they were killed off. My best guess is they had an election scandal and their wrongdoings were made public. I think Ronald had to take care of them, if you know what I mean. We never see the Burger Guys again. The final character to be removed in the culling of 85 was the Cookies from the Happy Meal gang. They were thrown in one of those waste bins and never came out. Now, with the roster tidied up a little bit, McDonald's plopped in a few new characters. The first of the characters is Cosmic, an alien from outer space. He likes to trade stuff, however, it's kind of a one-sided trade. He's the only one that wants to trade, and he sort of just yanks the stuff out of their hands and then gives them junk in exchange. He, of course, loved McDonald's and shared it with his alien people. The other character introduced was Mac Tonight. He was there to advertise the late hours of McDonald's. Since he was geared towards adults, he was never really shown with the other McDonaldland characters. In case you don't know about this guy, he is almost human, but he has a crescent moon head. He's an old-timey crooner mimicking Bobby Darin, a singer most popular in the 50s and 60s. That's where his name comes from. Mac the Knife was one of Bobby Darin's hit songs, so you get Mac Tonight. There were also brief appearances from other planetary characters. The actual moon wants McDonald's. He first appeared as a crescent, and then in a later commercial appeared as a full moon, and in that same commercial the sun appeared. Saturn is also a character. I guess everything is sentient in McDonaldland. In 1987, we would lose another member of our wonderful cast. The Captain would sail the 7 seas and never come back, finally redeemed only to walk the plank. Ronald and the Captain ended up being buds, so I don't know if Ronald was behind this one. Another sacrifice was made, and the Professor was exiled from McDonaldland. Him and Captain Crook were just phased out, and we never hear from them again. Mostly, anyway. Farewell to the Professor, who will still go down as one of the most forgotten McDonald's characters. I don't exactly know his last appearance, but it may have been in the short 8-minute animation called Ronald McDonald and the Adventure Machine. Ronald, Grimace, Hamburglar, and Birdie are bored, and they don't know what to do. The Professor comes along and he reveals his new invention, the Adventure Machine, which is essentially a teleporter. They go to various areas, but they also sort of time travel, so I don't know whether it's a teleporter, time machine, or whatever it is. They all make it home safe and are fine after a couple of close encounters. My guess is the Professor used it again by himself, and he still hasn't come back yet, assuming he got stuck in the past, or whatever, and died. This 1987 short animation was only shown at birthday parties held at McDonald's, and only a few years ago was found, previously being classified as lost media. Now that Ronald and gang were mainstream characters, Ronald got his own movie. Well, okay, not really. He briefly appeared in a movie. The movie was called Mac and Me, a rather infamous movie, a horrible E.T. knockoff, and the common consensus is that it's one of the worst movies ever made. For a multitude of reasons, but one of them being excessive product placement, specifically Coca-Cola and McDonald's. There's an entire scene in a McDonald's restaurant, and that's where Ronald McDonald appears. He doesn't really do much, because he's in it for just a few seconds. But he also had a teaser commercial thing for the movie, where he just encouraged the audience to watch the movie. That same year, which was 1988, McDonald's got their first video game, a Japanese exclusive called Donaldland. Because Ronald isn't Ronald in Japan, he's Donald. The game was a simple platformer, and honestly, it has almost nothing to do with McDonald's. They could have used any character because this game is just pretty much not McDonald's. Now, Exiting the 80s into the 90s. The commercials this decade overwhelmingly centered on the toys, to the point where Ronald and Gang barely appeared. The amount of commercials also significantly decreased. First and foremost, there was a new addition to the Happy Meal gang, a sentient Happy Meal box. That surely won't cause an issue later on. Right? Also, early in the decade, we lose yet again another character. Cosmic is kicked off the cast. Maybe he flew off into space, who knows? I do know we will hear from him again in 30 years. There are a few weird additions to the cast. Vulture, who is just pessimistic about everything, and joining him is Bernice, a creature. I don't know what she is. She just eats everything in sight. These characters are just in a handful of commercials and are quickly phased out. There was a new kind of villain, sort of like a floating fry guy. I Am Hungry. He does just what the fry guys do and nabs all the food he can. He was also just in a handful of commercials. In one of the few Ronald-centric commercials, a kid asks Ronald where McDonald's, the actual physical restaurants, come from. Stupid kid doesn't know that buildings has the word build in them, but Ronald shows him the McDonald's farm. This commercial makes it canon that McDonald's restaurants, the actual buildings, are grown on a farm, and whenever they need a new one somewhere, a large truck delivers it. Play places are also grown in patches near the McDonald's farm. I just wonder if they're fruits or vegetables. So not only is the food canonically grown on farms, so are the restaurants. One of the most common occurrences in the commercials this decade was Ronald and the gang singing the song, "Do You Believe in Magic?" That got annoying. They basically claim that as their theme song for the 90s. I'm not sure. Adding on to Grimace's heritage, they go on a picnic one day and he invites his aunts, Millie and Tilly. I'm just curious if one of them is married to Uncle O'Grimacy. The final character departure in the 90s was Mac Tonight, after a lawsuit from Bobby Darin's son saying they copied his likeness. Yeah. No duh. The lawsuit was dropped, but they still kicked Mac Tonight off the cast. Only for some time though. While there were a smaller number of commercials, it doesn't mean we had less content. Ronald and Gang got lots of animated specials. The first special was called The Adventures of Ronald McDonald, McTreasure Island. In this half-hour special, Ronald, Grimace, Hamburglar, and Birdie are messing around. There's a talking tree called Mr. Oak. I don't know if this is one of those trees from early McDonald Land or not. They bump into a dude and he gives them some books meant for the captain. Yes, he does mean the Captain Crook. They say they will take the books to him as they are expecting his arrival. However, they get sucked into one of those storybooks, and then they are on a pirate ship. The main villain of this story is Long John Silver because they are in Treasure Island. It's just kind of funny that Long John Silver is also the name of a fast food joint. You know, maybe it's not funny, but I thought it was funny. Okay, anyway, Ronald and Gang just go along with the story, and they get out of the book. It doesn't really matter. Who cares? Skip to the end. The part I was on the edge of my seat for. The Captain Crook returned from the Seven Seas and briefly appears in animated form. It's great to see him again after his retirement 3 years prior, but he is gone again after his 30 seconds on screen. And then he is never seen again. It's worth noting, in this special, Ronald uses magic multiple times, so it all but confirms he is definitely magic. The next special was released in 1998. Beginning the series, The Wacky Adventures of Ronald McDonald. It is completely separate from the previous McTreasure Island special. This is a series of 6 40-minute direct-to-VHS specials running from 1998 to 2003. They are all available on the internet, but I have a little something special. I have my own set, stored in a McDonald's toy display case that was obtained completely legally. Let me give you a rundown of these specials.
Sounds like someone's been watching some scary movies lately.
Klasky Chupo, the animator of the Rugrats, Ariel Monsters, the Wild Thornberrys, Rocket Power, and so on, animated all of these specials, which unfortunately made them horrific. If you've seen my older videos on Nickelodeon stuff, you'd know I hate Klasky Chupo animation. I don't care how unique it is, the stuff is terrifying and is so ugly. It's unsettling and literally creates phobias. And I will take any argument because I am dying on this hill. Anyway, they obliterated the character designs. Ronald looks okay. Grimace looks the best of the bunch. Hamburglar only sorta looks like Hamburglar. And Birdie, what happened to Birdie? They are also sometimes joined by Fry Kids and some new characters. The first is Sunday, Ronald's dog. He's Squidward before Squidward. He sounds and acts just like him. He's actually a nice little addition to the cast. The next new characters are technically not new. They're Chicken McNuggets, but they aren't the Chicken McNuggets we've seen before. These nuggets walk on 2 legs. They have wings, beaks, and combs. They took the qualities of a chicken and stuck it on a McNugget, which in my eyes is sort of morbid. Also, it creates so many questions. Are they currently cooked and ready to eat, including the beak and comb? Is this a separate species of McNugget than what the professor created in his lab? I genuinely could go on. The episodes start out live action, with Ronald and Sunday, which is a very scary puppet costume thing, and all these really were just a little bit of preamble for what the animation was about to be. They slide down their play place slide and they become animated. The first special released in 1998 called Scared Silly. The gang wants to go camping. They take Ronald's car, the McXplorer, which reminds me a lot of the Magic School Bus. They go out into the forest and one of Ronald's friends, named Tika, a regular boring human girl, has accompanied them. However, this isn't any ordinary forest. This is a spooky forest. And then it begins to rain, and after a storm, they seek shelter in a haunted mansion. The whole place is a puzzle. There's a ghost head that looks like a combination of both Snow Miser and Heat Miser. Turns out this head is just a kid operating a machine. His name is Franklin, and he is Tika's friend. This whole thing was Tika's idea to give Ronald a challenge. That's the reason they give. That's not my own conclusion. They pretty much say that in the dialogue. Seriously, I know this is meant for kids, but come on, give a little something better than that. Oh, did I mention these episodes are sing-songy? Personally, not what I would call a musical or anything, but they quote-unquote sing songs throughout, and I think it could have done without, but whatever. Ronald also uses a buttload of magic in this special as well, but this is really the only special he does it in. In the credits, if you're able to make it that far, Ronald McDonald is credited as himself. This isn't the first time this happened, but it was the first time I noticed. And good on McDonald's for not breaking the illusion, but also that implies Ronald McDonald is actually in our world somewhere showing up to movie sets. The next special released in 1999, The Legend of Grimace Island. I just knew this special would have lore. I was mostly wrong. Grimace receives a letter from Grimace Island saying they need his help. The backstory of Grimace Island is as follows. The Grimaces, which is a species apparently, were super peaceful and wouldn't hurt a fly. Some tribe came along and stole most of their treasure. To prevent this from happening again, the Grimaces stomped until the island broke free from the ground and floated away. That is amazing they could do that, but the bigger problem I have with this is that they are all Grimaces. Grimace's name is Grimace, and his species is Grimace. That's like naming someone human. Since Grimace Island floated away, no one knows where it is. They set sail, and after 20 minutes, not kidding, it takes half the special, they finally arrive at Grimace Island. You want to know how? Grimace had a map. His great-great-grandma, Winky Grimace, gave him. It was in his back pocket. What's worse is that Grimace somehow has pockets in his fur. When they reach Grimace Island, they learn that 2 pirates that have been following them wrote the letter and faked it, only to find the treasure left on Grimace Island. They defeat the pirates or whatever. This isn't a very consequential story. I thought this would be a really cool little backstory for Grimace. No, it actually wrecked it a little bit. By the way, Franklin, that kid from the last special, traveled with them, but Tika didn't. And unfortunately, Franklin would become a main character throughout these. The next special is about space travel, called The Visitors from Outer Space, also released in 1999. Nothing worth noting happens in this one. However, there is an appearance from I Am Hungry, so that's actually pretty cool. It also implies he's an alien. The next special released in 2001, called Birthday World. It also has nothing to it. A dumb story about a professor, not the professor, but just some dude that wanted to turn the world into babies but instead did it to Ronald and gang. Tika is back in this one, but then is gone permanently after it. The next episode, called Have Time, Will Travel, also released in 2001. It's all about time travel. It's not exactly my favorite thing to discuss in these videos because it makes everything easy to explain and not complicated at all. It's just what you think. Ronald and gang time travel to different periods. But first, before he becomes animated, Ronald has a sit-down interview with himself, answering his own questions. This could just be Ronald acting very eccentric, or he's crazy. I mean, at some point these antics must wear a man down. I think his sanity may be slipping. The first place they travel is Caveman Days, something they already did in the commercials, and here they run into Cavemen Ronald and gang, when previously we had only seen Caveman Hamburglar.
You look like me, only worse.
They travel to a few places, and then they end up in the 1970s McDonald land. You know, we've already been here, and they do not portray it as it was. They make it all disco themed, so whatever. But you know who is here? The one, the only, the corrupt politician Mayor McCheese. Back after 15 years, he gets a brief cameo. I don't know if him being animated skirts the lawsuit or what, but 10 out of 10 cameo. At the end of the episode, Ronald uses magic wind to pick up the laboratory. This is the last time I'm bringing up his magic. I just needed to fully prove that he is more than human. So this special may or may not retcon the lore it just established in the Grimace Island episode. There is a caveman Grimace. I got the impression Grimaces originated from Grimace Island, not prehistoric mainland. I can't prove that it messes up the lineage or not. The last episode is called The Monster O' McDonald Land Lock, and again, it's about sciencey stuff. Sunday is invited to Scotland by his relative. They already sort of did that story with Grimace. Birdie finds the real Loch Ness Monster. Meanwhile, these other side characters make a fake Loch Ness Monster for monetary gain. Anyway, this episode is thankfully the last one. This episode is just whatever. There really isn't much to it, but there is a very cool and lore-filled 1-second scene at the beginning of the episode. As they are driving through McDonald Land, they pass the embassy, and out front is a statue of Mayor McCheese. Look, I'm no expert, but I think this confirms he is dead. Traditionally, statues are not made of living people. That's it for the wacky adventures of Ronald McDonald, and I'm very grateful because I cannot stand those stupid chicken McNuggets. But even worse, I hate Klasky Chupo animation. This decade, McDonaldland also got multiple video games. And believe it or not, they contribute nothing to this long and winding story. The first is McKids. It follows Mick and Mac and legit has nothing to do with McDonald's at all. They get a pseudo-sequel called Global Gladiators, which also had nothing to do with McDonald's, just keeping the characters Mick and Mac. After this, there was McDonald's Treasure Land Adventure for the Genesis. Finally, something that is coherently McDonald's. You play as Ronald in a colorful world, and you fight bosses that has nothing to do with McDonald's. The last console game of the 90s was Ronald McDonald in Magical World, another Japanese exclusive. Grimace, Hamburglar, and Birdie were sucked into a magic map, and Ronald has to go rescue them. Again, fighting enemies and bosses that have zero to do with McDonald's. Then there was this game called Adventure Through McDonald Land, and then I think a sequel called Mission to McDonald Land, and I don't even know what to make of it. It has maybe the best graphics I think I've ever seen. Moving into the millennium, where the biggest and most consequential change happens. Right off the bat, the Happy Meal gang has some updates. Despite not being used very much in the 90s. A toy bag was added, very similar to the cookies. Oh, and the fries now go by she/her pronouns. The fries are now female. This decade, we barely even get Ronald. The commercials are very 2000. I don't know what makes them that way, but they sure do look it. Honestly, they don't really even advertise the toys very much anymore. Every commercial is just about new menu items, and there were just so many of them. Advertising burgers for $1 just a mere 25 years ago. Meanwhile, right now you can't even buy a Big Mac for less than 7 or 8. I'm sorry, I sound like I'm 40. Grimace did a handful of commercials with a guy that was recently elected and totally not controversial at all, Donald Trump. Watching through these 2000s commercials and watching the complete degradation of the McDonald Land franchise go down the crapper is really sad. They've altered the cast so much, I don't even know who's still here. Sunday never made it out of the wacky adventures, along with those godforsaken chicken McNugget things. The Fry Kids are gone, most likely imprisoned. I don't know why, it just makes sense. The Happy Meal gang, despite recent changes, are completely gone, leaving us with Ronald, Grimace, Hamburglar, and Birdie. If I forgot to mention a character disappearance, my bad. There's been a lot. These 4 is all that is left. Now, for the downfall of McDonald Land. McDonald's was getting blamed for childhood obesity. The play places were revamped from McDonald Land characters to just basic slides and jungle gym equipment, which had started in the 90s. TV laws also affected McDonald's. The laws essentially made it so children had to be getting educational programming. Stuff like Dora, you know? Which limited advertising time. So McDonald's mostly stopped putting kids' stuff in the ads. With everything I just listed, it completely led to the removal. Are you sitting down? Pause for effect. Birdie the Early Bird and the Hamburglar. They were phased out of McDonald's. McDonald Land was officially gone. They got rid of it. The nation, or whatever it was, of McDonald Land was dissolved and annexed by corporate. They did what we did not think was possible. Now nearly every ad was focused on adults. Everyone from all walks of life eating those delicious McDonald's hamburgers. The commercials with the distinct 2000s filter, close-up shots, and choppy editing that makes everything look like a new metal music video completely overtook McDonald's branding. In 2006, McDonald's and Disney's 19-year-long relationship ended after not renewing their contract. I'm not entirely sure if there was any huge reason why, but after that, the toys were definitely, well, I can't say not cool because they still sort of were, but there was a change in quality and overall feel to them. Something else in 2006, before the contract ended, I'm assuming at least, a DVD series was made called McKids Adventures. It's a live-action show made by the same people that made That's So Raven and Even Stevens, both Disney shows. There were only 2 specials released, Get Up and Go with Ronald and Treasure Hunt with Ronald. Apparently Ronald always has something to do with treasure hunting. These were your typical kids show things. They weren't good. But of course, it is meant for 3-year-olds. Get Up and Go with Ronald is mostly about exercise. Maybe trying to clear their name a little? There was already a rising emphasis on healthier options and exercise at McDonald's, and this just added on to the propaganda. The other one is a basic treasure hunt thing. They're pretty silly, but this is really the first time we have long-form live-action Ronald, at least that I'm aware of. These half-hour DVDs compared to the minute commercials, Ronald is actually very off-putting. It doesn't help that actors switch about every decade, but this Ronald is so lifeless. He gives the illusion of excitement, but you can just tell it's a facade. He feels like he is just waiting for something. I don't know what. At the end of the first one, there's like a concert part where the kids are playing in a rock band. I'm gonna say it here first. It might be controversial. I might get some comments that disagree, but I'm gonna say it. I don't think these kids are actually playing the instruments and singing. That's it. I said it. The other treasure hunt one is just a little adventure. I don't know, watching these, or rather struggling to watch these, it gives me the feeling McDonald's may not have been happy with the product Disney gave them. I'm kidding, of course. I don't think these DVD specials made it so they did not renew their contract. In 2007, they made the craziest decision yet. Grimace was extinguished, shunned back to Grimace Island. He reappeared very, very rarely, but not really in any commercials. Last time Grimace was seen before the 2020s was a live mascot version of Grimace at a Dodgers game dancing to Black Betty, and then gone without a trace. I'm not exactly sure what he ended up saying to Donald Trump in those commercials, but whatever it was made Trump mad at him, and now he's deported back to Grimace Island. All we are left with is Ronald. However, in Malaysia, there was hope. I don't know why it was there, but Mac Tonight returned. Again, it's so odd that of all places he pops back up in Malaysia, maybe he was hiding out there. But unfortunately, it did not last long, and he went back into hiding in 2010. In 2009, and throughout the 2010s, McDonald's was still mostly advertising to adults, but toy commercials were starting to come back, and advertising targeting kids did too. Only a small fraction of what it once was, but it was sorta back nonetheless. No, it didn't technically leave in the 2000s, but for all intents and purposes, it was pretty much gone. However, Ronald did not advertise them. A kinda new character arose. Do you remember that Happy Meal box from the Happy Meal gang? It's him. I mean, I don't know if it's him, but it's a similar character. He grew arms, legs, human teeth, and was CGI. And boy oh boy, does he look like he originates from 2009. His name is Happy, and he looks like a mix of something from Minions, Rabbids, and a complete hellspawn. He would interact with the movie characters or whatever the toys were promoting. No longer residing in McDonald Land, but instead, the Void. They weren't all here. Sometimes he would be in the setting of the movie the toys were advertising for, or other various places. There is a place called Happy City, which is like a McDonald's Land wannabe. A bunch of Happy Meal boxes reside there. Happy would also cosplay some of the characters he would advertise for, so that was cool. And honestly, I don't hate Happy. He was no Ronald McDonald, but then again, those were pretty big shoes to fill. No, literally. They were ginormous. But he definitely fit the early 2010s meta of eerie-looking CGI characters in a random void. What was Ronald up to in this time, though? He was cheering up kids on the side of the street. If you're my age, you must remember these commercials, right? They are incredibly nostalgic for me, at least. He ended up getting an outfit change in 2014. Can't say this is better than his look that's 50 years old, but whatever. I'm not in charge of McDonald's marketing. I should be, though. Around this time, calls to retire Ronald began. However, they were shot down. The Hamburglar was brought back. They decided to get a human actor. I don't know, man. He just sort of looks like Orville Peck. Without any surprise, this did not last long. So do you remember all those issues I listed? Play places were becoming almost non-existent. McDonald's wasn't really aimed at kids anymore. Childhood obesity, a big emphasis on that. All other characters were gone. Increased demand in his retirement. And the cherry on top was the creepy killer clown fad in 2016. And there went Ronald McDonald. They did the impossible. While never officially retiring him, he was gone. The last remnant left was Happy, the Happy Meal box. It looked bleak for him too, though. McDonald's were unhappy gray boxes, and everything was so corporate. And unfortunately, it's still what we have today. If Ronald couldn't survive it, how was Happy going to? Anyway, there was a glimmer of hope. In 2018, McDonald's and Disney went into a new deal after 12 years of separation. There might be hope for future kids stuff. Well, that's wrong. Happy was booted in February of 2020, so I'm pretty sure Happy got COVID and died. Just saying. It lines up just too perfectly. All mascots were now gone. Mac Tonight didn't make an official return, but he was a little busy doing some, extracurricular activities. He became known online as Moon Man and started spouting slurs and other stuff like that. Again, I really need to reiterate, McDonald's did not do this. They obviously would never do something like this. Some maniacs on the internet did. They changed his songs to be very violent, and he became an icon for the alt-right. To see Mac Tonight in front of these 1940s German flags is certainly a sight to see. It got so popular, if that's the right word. It's probably not the right word, actually. But it got so big, Moon Man was classified as a hate symbol by the Anti-Defamation League. Now, in the 2020s, McDonald's is just another corporate fast food chain that dissolved all mascots like almost every other company. However, in June of 2023, for Grimace's 50th birthday, a new Grimace shake was added to the menu, along with the revival of Grimace. A result of the shake came a massive online trend where people drank the shakes and pretended to get killed by Grimace or whatever. It wasn't that funny. But there was also an online platformer game mimicking a Game Boy game, simply called Grimace's Birthday. The game didn't really add much to the lore, but it was very cool to see. This was a signal that they might be bringing characters back. The Hamburglar was also brought back to advertise the improvements being made to the burgers. This was a good sign. The next great sign was the new restaurant McDonald's is creating, the spin-off chain called Cosmix, named after none other than the one and only alien from the 80s. While he has yet to make an appearance as far as I can tell, it seems promising as this new spin-off is supposedly going to feature more mascot-related stuff. All of this was great, however, the absence of Ronald still rubs me the wrong way. Despite everything looking on the right track, 2024 saw nothing new. Grimace and Hamburglar went back into hiding, and the excitement around Cosmix died down. That's not to say they lied about Cosmix being mascot-oriented. The new chain is a baby, but so far nothing has come out of it. The only bits of media I think I missed were the Charlton comic books from the 1970s. A short little series with Ronald. I don't actually know what happens in them. I tried to download the pages, but almost got a virus, so I'm not going to try and do that again. There was also a little golden book called Ronald McDonald and the Tale of the Talking Plant, so I assume that plant was another abomination from McDonald Land. I don't know what's in store for the future of these mascots. There are Funko Pops of like nearly every character, and yes, I have every single one of them, and there's some other merch lines keeping them at least a little bit alive. But with all the deaths in McDonald Land and all of the exiles, I don't think any of them can come back. Ronald, Grimace, Hamburglar, and Birdie might make a return, but I'd be willing to bet that will be it. Unfortunately, we just don't really live in a mascot world anymore, so their return is even more unlikely. Farewell, McDonald Land. You were mostly cool while you lasted. And I think that's about it. Thanks for watching. This video was very fun to make, so let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this one in the future. You should subscribe because it won't give you any calories, unlike McDonald's food. It's also free, unlike McDonald's food.